What kind of neighbor demands your garage keys and expects you to comply without question? That's what I faced when Karen, the HOA president, stormed up my driveway, her clipboard clutched like a weapon, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. Her voice cut through the quiet of our suburban cul-de-sac, sharp and unyielding, as she declared my garage was in violation of some obscure HOA rule. I stood there, stunned, my morning coffee growing cold in my hand, as she thrust a letter at me, demanding I surrender my keys for an inspection. Refusal, she warned, would mean fines, legal action, maybe even eviction. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity. I'd lived in this house for 10 years, paid every dues, mowed my lawn to the precise inch. And now this? I looked at her, her perfectly pressed blazer and smug smile, and felt something snap inside me. I wasn't handing over anything. My name's Ethan Caldwell, a mechanic by trade, a widower by fate, and a man who'd rather fix problems than start them. My house, a modest 2-story with a wraparound porch, sat at the edge of Willow Creek, a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone until Karen moved in. She'd taken over the HOA 6 months ago, and since then, life here had become a maze of petty rules and power trips. No flower pots over 6 inches. No cars parked on the street past 9 p.m. No flags. No signs. No personality. My garage, though, was my sanctuary. It wasn't just where I parked my truck. It was my workshop, my haven, where I rebuilt engines and pieced together memories of my late wife, Sarah. Karen didn't know that, and I wasn't about to explain it to her. But when I told her no, her face twisted like I'd slapped her. She promised to return with authority. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it wasn't good. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a car, doors slamming. Peering through my blinds, I saw Karen, flanked by 2 HOA board members, Tom, a nervous accountant who avoided eye contact, and Linda, a retired schoolteacher who seemed to live for Karen's approval. They stood at my garage door, Karen pounding on it like she owned the place. I pulled on a flannel and stepped outside, my breath visible in the crisp autumn air. "Ethan," Karen said, her voice dripping with false patience, "we're here to inspect your garage. Hand over the keys, or we'll escalate this." I crossed my arms, leaning against the porch railing. "Escalate how?" I asked. She didn't answer, just gestured to Tom, who fumbled with a camera, snapping photos of my garage door like it was a crime scene. Linda scribbled notes, her pen moving furiously. I felt my blood boil. This wasn't about rules. This was personal. I'd heard rumors about Karen's tactics, neighbors bullied into compliance, fines for minor infractions, even threats of liens. But I hadn't realized how far she'd go until that moment. I told them to leave. Karen's eyes narrowed, and she said, "You'll regret this." As I walked away, I noticed a small crowd gathering across the street. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow, and Jake, the kid who mowed my lawn. They looked worried, whispering to each other. I waved them off, trying to seem calm, but inside, I was rattled. What could she do? Call the cops? Over a garage? I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to focus on the engine I was rebuilding, a 1967 Mustang, Sarah's dream car. But my hand shook as I worked, and I kept glancing at the window, expecting trouble. By noon, trouble arrived. A police cruiser pulled into my driveway. Lights off, but presence loud. 2 officers stepped out, one young and wiry, the other older, with a tired look in his eyes. Karen was right behind them, her clipboard now replaced by a triumphant smirk. "Mr. Caldwell," the older officer said, "we've had a complaint about illegal activity in your garage. We need to take a look." Illegal activity? My stomach dropped. I knew my garage was clean: tools, car parts, a few boxes of Sarah's things, but the accusation stung. I opened the door, my hand steady despite the rage bubbling inside. "Go ahead," I said, stepping aside. Karen pushed forward, eager, almost gleeful. The officers followed, their boots heavy on the concrete floor. What they saw made Karen's face go pale. She fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 in a panic, her voice shrill. "There's a bomb," she screamed. My heart stopped. A bomb? In my garage? This wasn't just a power trip anymore. This was something else entirely. The officers froze, hands on their holsters, eyes darting around my garage. Karen's scream echoed off the walls, her finger pointing at a metal box tucked in the corner, wires spilling out like a tangle of snakes. It was my old welding rig, a project I'd abandoned after Sarah's death, its cables frayed and dusty. To me, it was just junk, but to Karen, it was a ticking time bomb. "Step back," the younger officer barked, pulling me away from the door. I raised my hands, heart pounding, trying to explain, but Karen was already on her phone, her voice trembling with exaggerated fear. "It's dangerous. He's hiding something." The older officer, calmer, squinted at the box, then at me. "This your welding equipment?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tight. "Been there for years." "It's not a bomb." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't draw his gun either. They cordoned off my driveway, yellow tape snapping in the wind, as neighbors began to gather, their whispers growing louder. Karen's accusation wasn't random. I realized it as I stood there, watching her play the victim for the growing crowd. A month ago, I'd challenged her at an HOA meeting. She proposed a rule banning home workshops, claiming they lowered property values. I'd stood up, called it absurd, and pointed out that my garage was my livelihood. The room had gone quiet, and Karen's face had turned red. I'd humiliated her, and now she was striking back. This wasn't about a rule violation, it was revenge. The officers searched my garage, their movements methodical, while Karen hovered, feeding them half-truths. "He's always working late," she said. "Strange noises, chemicals. Who knows what he's doing?" I wanted to scream. Chemicals? I used motor oil and WD-40, not explosives. But the more I protested, the guiltier I looked. The twist came when Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow from across the street, pushed through the crowd. Her frail frame barely reached Karen's shoulder, but her voice carried a surprising strength. "You're wrong about him," she said, glaring at Karen. "Ethan's been fixing my car for free since my husband passed. He's no criminal." The younger officer paused, glancing at her, then at me. "Mrs. Henderson," went on, her hands trembling but her words firm. "Karen's been after him since he stood up to her." "This is a vendetta," the crowd murmured, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in the older officer's eyes. Karen's face tightened, But she doubled down, insisting the box was dangerous. The officers called for a bomb squad, just to be safe, and I felt my world tilt. My garage, my refuge, was now a crime scene, and I was the suspect. As the bomb squad arrived, their van siren cutting through the afternoon, I caught Jake's eye. The kid looked terrified, his lawnmower abandoned in my yard. I gave him a nod, trying to reassure him, but my own fear was clawing at me. What if they found something? Not a bomb, but something Karen could twist? I kept Sarah's things in there, letters, photos, even her old medical records from the cancer treatment. Could they misinterpret that? The bomb squad technician, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, examined the welding rig. After 10 agonizing minutes, she turned to the officers. It's just old equipment. No explosives, no chemicals. Karen's face fell, but she didn't back down. Check the rest, she demanded. The technician shot her a look, then continued her sweep, finding nothing but tools and car parts. The officers exchanged glances, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this would end. But Karen wasn't done. She pulled out her clipboard, now a prop in her performance, and started listing violations, oil stains, stacked boxes, even a cracked window I'd meant to fix. The officers listened, but their patience was thinning. The crowd, though, was shifting. Mrs. Henderson's words had spread, and neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years began to speak up. He rebuilt my carburetor last summer, one said. Fixed my kid's bike, another added. Karen's authority was cracking, but she didn't see it. She was too busy building her case, too sure of her power. I stood there, watching her unravel, and realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone she'd bullied, everyone she'd silenced. I wasn't fighting for my garage, I was fighting for all of us. The air grew thick with tension as the bomb squad packed up, their van pulling away with a low rumble. Karen stood in my driveway, her clipboard trembling in her hands, her face a mask of defiance. The officers, now visibly annoyed, told her there was no threat, no reason to escalate further. But Karen wasn't listening. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising, accusing me of undermining the neighborhood's standards. He's a danger, she shouted, pointing at me like I was a criminal mastermind. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some nodding out of habit, others exchanging skeptical glances. I could feel the tide turning, but it wasn't enough. Karen had power, and she knew how to wield it. She demanded the officers issue me a citation for noncompliance. The younger one hesitated, but the older one, Officer Daniels, sighed and pulled out a notepad. Let's just get this over with, he muttered. I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. You want to talk about standards, Karen? Let's talk about you. The crowd went quiet. I hadn't planned to do this, but Mrs. Henderson's courage had sparked something in me. I turned to the neighbors, my voice carrying across the cul-de-sac. She's been fining people for nothing, Mrs. Henderson for her rose bushes, Jake for his skateboard ramp. She's not protecting this neighborhood. She's tearing it apart. Karen's eyes widened. But I didn't stop. You want my keys? Fine. But you're not stepping foot in my garage until you explain why you're targeting me. The crowd murmured. Louder now. And I saw Jake step forward, his teenage bravado kicking in. She told me I'd get fined if I didn't mow her lawn for free, he said. The murmurs grew into gasps. Karen's face flushed red, but she recovered quickly, spinning to Officer Daniels. He's deflecting. He's hiding something in there. She pointed at my garage, her voice shrill. Daniels looked at me, then at her, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He'd dealt with people like her before. "Ma'am," he said, "we've checked the garage. There's nothing illegal here." But Karen wasn't deterred. She pulled out her phone again, this time calling the HOA's lawyer, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I want an emergency meeting. He's in violation, and I'll prove it." The crowd was splitting now, some backing away, others stepping closer, drawn to the drama. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but also angry. This was my home, my life, and she was trying to take it apart piece by piece. Then came the twist that hit me like a punch. Linda, the retired schoolteacher who'd been Karen's shadow, stepped forward, her face pale. "Karen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you told me to lie about Ethan's garage. You said we'd find something to make him leave." The crowd gasped, and even Officer Daniels froze, his pen hovering over his notepad. Karen spun on her, eyes blazing. "That's ridiculous. You're confused, Linda." But Linda didn't back down. She looked at me, guilt in her eyes, and said, "I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't know it would go this far." The weight of her words hung in the air. Karen had orchestrated this, manipulated her own board member, and now her plan was unraveling in front of everyone. I felt a surge of gratitude toward Linda, but also a pang of betrayal. She'd been part of this, even if reluctantly. The confrontation peaked as Karen, cornered, lashed out. "You're all against me," she screamed, her clipboard falling to the ground. "This neighborhood needs order, and you're all too weak to see it." Officer Daniels stepped between us, his voice firm. "Ma'am, you need to calm down. This is over." But it wasn't over for me. I looked at the crowd, at the neighbors who'd been silent for too long, and realized this was my chance. "If you want to inspect my garage," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "come see for yourself." I walked to the door, my hand steady now, and opened it wide. The crowd hesitated, then slowly approached, their curiosity outweighing their fear. Karen tried to stop them, but Daniels held up a hand. "Let them look," he said. As they stepped inside, I braced myself for what came next. The garage door creaked open, revealing the cluttered but orderly space I'd spent years building. Tools lined the walls, meticulously hung. The Mustang's engine sat half-assembled on a workbench, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Boxes of Sarah's things, her journals, her favorite mugs, were stacked neatly in a corner. The neighbors stepped inside, their faces a mix of curiosity and caution. Mrs. Henderson was first, her eyes softening as she saw the Mustang. "Sarah's car," she whispered, remembering. Jake followed, his jaw dropping at the tools. "This is awesome," he said, forgetting the tension for a moment. Even Officer Daniels peered in, his expression neutral but attentive. Karen, though, stayed outside, her arms crossed, her face a storm of fury and humiliation. She knew what was coming, and she couldn't stop it. As the neighbors looked around, I spoke, my voice steady but raw. This is my life, I said. My work, my memories. Karen called it a threat. But it's just a garage. I pointed to the welding rig, now clearly harmless in the light. She saw what she wanted to see, not what's real. The crowd nodded, some whispering to each other, others looking at Karen with new eyes. Linda, still shaken, added, "She told me to say there were chemicals." I didn't know why. The truth was sinking in, and Karen's power was crumbling. She tried to interrupt, her voice sharp, but the crowd ignored her, their attention on me. For the first time, I felt like they saw me, not as a troublemaker, but as one of them. Karen's collapse was swift and brutal. She lunged toward the garage, shouting, "You're all blind. He's manipulating you." But her words fell flat. Officer Daniels stepped in front of her, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, you're done here. Go home." The crowd parted as she stormed off, her heels clicking on the pavement, her clipboard left behind like a discarded weapon. The neighbors stayed, some apologizing, others asking questions about the Mustang. Jake offered to help me finish it, his eyes bright with excitement. "Mrs. Henderson squeezed my arm, her voice soft. Sarah would be proud. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words hitting me deeper than I expected. The officers, satisfied there was no threat, packed up and left, but not before Daniels gave me a nod. "You're all right, Caldwell," he said. "Keep that garage locked." As the crowd dispersed, I stood in my driveway, the autumn sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac. I felt lighter, but not victorious. Karen's reign had cracked, but the damage she'd done to me, to the neighborhood, lingered. I went back inside the garage, closing the door behind me, and picked up a wrench. The Mustang's engine waited, patient and unfinished, just like my life without Sarah. I worked late that night, the hum of the garage a comfort, a reminder that I'd fought for this space and won. But I knew Karen wouldn't give up easily. She lost today, but people like her always come back, armed with new rules, new ways to control. I'd be ready. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was from Linda, handwritten and shaky. "I'm resigning from the HOA," it read. "I'm sorry for my part in this. Let me know if you need anything." I tucked it into my pocket. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The neighborhood felt different now, quieter, like it was holding its breath. I saw Jake outside, mowing Mrs. Henderson's lawn, and waved. He grinned back, a kid who'd seen too much but was still hopeful. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about my garage. It was about taking back our home, our community, from someone who'd tried to break it. I wasn't alone anymore, and that was enough to keep going. The days that followed were a blur of quiet victories and lingering tension. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers about Karen's meltdown, and for the first time, people weren't afraid to talk openly. At the corner store, Mrs. Henderson told me she'd started a petition to reform the HOA already with a dozen signatures. Jake stopped by my garage, bringing a soda and a shy offer to learn about engines. I showed him how to torque a bolt, and his grin reminded me of myself at his age, tinkering with my dad's old Chevy. The garage felt alive again, not just a refuge, but a place where connections were rebuilding. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was plotting something. Her house, 2 streets over, was too quiet. Her blinds always drawn. I kept my doors locked, my tools secured, just in case. A week later, the HOA called an emergency meeting. I almost didn't go, but Mrs. Henderson insisted, her eyes fierce. "We need you there, Ethan," she said. So I went, wearing my usual flannel, feeling out of place among the pressed slacks and polished loafers. The community center was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Karen stood at the podium, her face composed, but her hands gripping the edges tightly. She announced a new set of rules. Stricter than ever, no home businesses, no unsightly vehicles, no exceptions. The crowd shifted, uneasy, and I felt my jaw tighten. She was doubling down, using her authority to punish us all. But then Mrs. Henderson stood, her voice cutting through the room. "This is about control, not community," she said. "We deserve better." The room erupted in murmurs, then voices, then shouts. Jake's mom, a single parent who'd been fined for her son's skateboard ramp, stood next. "You fine me for my kid's hobby. Karen, where's the fairness in that?" One by one, neighbors spoke up, their stories spilling out, fines for overgrown grass, threats for unapproved mailboxes, even a warning for a child's chalk drawing on a driveway. Karen's face grew paler with each accusation, her composure cracking. I stayed quiet, watching, until she pointed at me. "This started with him," she said, her voice shaking. "He's the one defying us." All eyes turned to me, and I stood, my heart steady. "I'm not defying the neighborhood," I said. "I'm standing up for it. You're the one tearing us apart." The meeting spiraled into chaos. Linda, true to her word, announced her resignation, her voice trembling but clear. 2 other board members followed, leaving Karen alone at the podium. She tried to regain control, banging her gavel, but the crowd was done listening. Someone called for a vote to dissolve the HOA entirely, and the room roared with approval. Karen stormed out, her heels echoing in the now silent hall. I didn't feel triumph, just relief. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was ours again. As we left, Mrs. Henderson linked her arm through mine. "You did good, Ethan," she said. I smiled, but my thoughts were on Sarah. She'd always said community was about trust, not rules. I hoped I'd made her proud. Back home, I opened the garage and started on the Mustang again. Jake joined me, his hands clumsy but eager. We worked in silence, the clank of tools a kind of music. The fight wasn't over. Karen could still cause trouble, and rebuilding the neighborhood would take time. But for now, the garage was mine, and so was the hope that we could be better. I looked at Jake, at the engine, at the boxes of Sarah's things, and felt something shift. This wasn't just about holding on, it was about moving forward, together. The weeks after the meeting felt like a new beginning, fragile but real. The HOA was officially dissolved, replaced by a loose council of volunteers, led by Mrs. Henderson. She organized potlucks, cleanup days, even a car show where I displayed the Mustang, still unfinished but gleaming with potential. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before stopped by my garage, offering coffee, stories, or with just a nod of respect. Jake became a regular, learning to rebuild carburetors with a focus that made me proud. The cul-de-sac was alive again. Kids played in the street. Flags reappeared on porches, and flower pots grew defiantly larger than 6 inches. But Karen's absence was conspicuous. Her house stayed dark, her car gone for days at a time. I didn't trust the quiet. One evening, as I locked up the garage, I found a letter taped to my door. No signature, just a typed note. You think you've won? But this isn't over. My stomach twisted. It had to be Karen, but there was no proof. I showed it to Mrs. Henderson, who frowned but didn't seem surprised. She's not the type to let go, she said. Be careful. Ethan, I started checking my locks twice, keeping my phone close. The garage felt less like a sanctuary now, more like a target. I hated that she could still make me feel this way, but I refused to let her win. I kept working, kept teaching Jake, kept living. Then, one night, I heard a noise outside, a soft scrape, like metal on concrete. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the driveway, my heart racing. The street was dark, the air heavy with the scent of rain. I shone the light toward the garage and saw it, a crowbar, abandoned near the door, scratches fresh on the lock. Someone had tried to break in. I called the police, my voice calm, but my hands shaking. Officer Daniels came, the same tired-eyed cop from before. He examined the crowbar, bagged it for prints, and asked if I had enemies. I didn't say Karen's name, but we both knew. I'll keep an eye out, he said, but I could tell he was skeptical. No proof, no case. I stayed up all night, watching the street, the Mustang silhouette a reminder of what I was protecting. The next day, I installed a security camera, its red light blinking like a challenge. Jake helped, his chatter a welcome distraction. She's scared of you, he said, tightening a screw. That's why she's sneaking around. I laughed, but he wasn't wrong. Karen's power had come from fear, and now that we weren't afraid, she was desperate. I didn't want to fight her forever, but I would if I had to. The neighborhood was healing, and I wouldn't let her tear it down again. Mrs. Henderson stopped by with cookies, her eyes scanning the street. We're watching out for you, she said. I nodded, grateful, and realized this was what Sarah had meant by community, not rules, but people standing together. As I worked on the Mustang that night, I found one of Sarah's old letters tucked in a toolbox. Her handwriting faded but familiar. Keep building. Ethan, she'd written. You're stronger than you know. I folded it carefully, my throat tight, and looked at the engine. It was almost done, just like this fight. Karen could try again, but she'd find a neighborhood ready to push back. I wasn't alone anymore, and that was my strength. Spring arrived, painting Willow Creek in shades of green and gold. The Mustang was finished, its engine purring like a promise kept. I drove it to the community car show, Jake in the passenger seat, his grin wider than the horizon. Neighbors gathered, clapping as we pulled up, Mrs. Henderson beaming like a proud parent. The cul-de-sac was alive with laughter, music, and the smell of grill burgers. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. Karen's house was for sale now, her reign a fading memory. Some said she'd moved to another state, chasing new rules to enforce. I didn't care. She'd lost, not because I'd fought harder, but because we'd fought together. The security camera caught nothing after that night with a crowbar. Daniels called to say the prints were inconclusive, but he'd patrol more often. I thanked him, but I knew the real protection was the neighborhood itself. Jake's mom started a book club. Mrs. Henderson planted roses without fear of fines. And I taught a free mechanic class in my garage. Kids and adults crowding around the Mustang. Each wrench turn, each shared story, was a brick in the wall we'd built against people like Karen. I kept Sarah's letter on my workbench, a reminder of why I'd fought, not just for the garage, but for the life we'd dreamed of here. One evening, as I locked up, Jake ran up, out of breath. "Look," he said, pointing to a mural on the community center wall. It was new, painted by the neighborhood kids, a bright, messy collage of cars, flowers, and smiling faces. In the corner, in bold letters, was Ethan's garage, where we build together. I laughed, my eyes stinging. Sarah would have loved this. I clapped Jake on the shoulder, and we walked back to the cul-de-sac, the sunset warm on our backs. The fight had been ugly, but it had shown us who we were. We weren't just neighbors, we were a family, forged in the fire of standing up. And that was worth everything.